And yeah, for the next hour, I am going to be talking to you about how to get shortlisted and win journalism awards, in particular, the SBA Awards, which is why we're all here. So as I said, hi, my name's Jem. I am the director and editor of a website called Journal Resources, which is a social enterprise that helps people both get into journalism and progress within journalism. We have tons of tools and resources that you can use if you're considering checking out a career in journalism. So please do check us out. It was also the reason that I was a couple of minutes late starting because I was just sending out our weekly email that we do. So yeah, please do check us out. Everything on there is free. But the reason I'm giving this talk this evening is that I'm also a trustee for the Student Publication Association. I have been involved and part of the SBA for way too long. I got involved when I was the editor of my student paper and then became a regional officer and was a former chair. I had a short break, seemingly never able to leave, and I'm now back here as a trustee. What I'm going to be covering over the next roughly hour is I'm going to talk a little bit about why the actual entry that you put together is so important, and I guess just as important as the work that you're actually putting in. I'm going to run you through a couple of the resources that we have available to you that you can use when you're putting those entries together. I'm going to talk a little bit about what goes into an entry and what those shortlisters and judges would like to see. And then I'm going to finish up with a little bit of how I typically tend to judge things and some final tips. And then, yeah, I would definitely make sure that we keep some time for questions as well. So hopefully that sounds roughly okay, roughly what you're expecting. And yeah, we'll kick off. So I guess one final thing, I guess, before we start, is that I wanted to tell you just a little bit of my credentials to prove that what I'm saying, I guess, is useful, hopefully. So yeah, I'm a judge for a couple of awards. I judge the Freelancing for Journalists Awards, the SBA regional and national awards. So judge for the regionals, but on the shortlisting team for the national awards. I'm a judge for the Georgina Henry Award, the British Journalism Awards, and the Printing Charities Rising Star Awards. And I've also put a couple of the things that I've won myself, I guess, over the last few years. And the reason that I am so passionate about running this session every year, so this is the second time we've done it, and in previous years we've written up various things, is I really want to make these awards as equitable as possible, and that's really important to me, and why we're trying to build up our bank of resources that you can use to make sure you're able to put the best thing forward that you possibly can. So we'd equally love your feedback at the end of this as well. So feel free to drop me an email. It's just jem@sbajournalism.co.uk and .com, sorry. And if there's anything, I guess, that we don't cover tonight, or any other formats that you would appreciate this information coming in, we would love to hear that so that we can kind of expand that. And yeah, haven't just said, I guess, those judges and winners things to show off, but I guess the point being that hopefully the stuff that I tell you is pretty standard, I guess, across all of those awards that I've been part of. So hopefully I do know what I'm talking about, I hope. So yeah, that's me. So one of the ones that I would particularly, I guess, draw your attention to off that big list is last year now, 2023. I was the winner of the IPSI Freelancer of the Year Award. And the reason I wanted to pull that one out in particular is because I entered that award 6 times before I won. I am, both to my partner and a couple of my friends, quite renowned for not giving up when it comes to awards. And I'm not suggesting that any of you here need to try 6 times at the SBA Awards before you win. That is why you're all here. You'd have to do at least 2 degrees to do that if you are attempting 6 times. And the absolute opposite is what I want for you guys. I want you to win first time. But the reason I guess I'm telling you that is that I think what it proves to me is the entry is just as important as the work itself. So I have no doubt that, well, I hope that the work I put together and sent along for that entry 6 years ago has actually got better and that I've progressed. But I actually think a real big thing that has changed for me over the 6 years in which I first started applying for that award that I really wanted to get is that I've just got better at writing award entries. So no matter how good, I guess the point I'm trying to get across is that no matter how good your work is, the entry itself is just as important. So I would really make sure that you spend, and this will sound obvious, but it will really make sure that you spend the time and I guess effort thinking about both the entry as as well as the work that you submit, because I think that's what's changed for me is I have everything I think I've ever won has very rarely there's been a couple of times where it's been the first time round, but it's very rarely been the first time round because I've tweaked and I've changed and kind of done things a little bit differently to kind of make that better. So I really would put as much effort as into that entry as you did the work itself. Now, the reason for that is it's not kind of like any kind of conspiracy about what jobs anyone's looking for or what judges are looking for. There's no one, I guess, magical thing. It's actually just a bit of a math problem. So last year for the SPA awards, we had 1,200 entries in total. That is a lot of entries. Now, if you do the maths on that and say everyone is going to spend 1 minute per entry and somehow they're going to be able to read your whole piece or your whole publication and the supporting statement, and they don't stop for a breather at any point, they don't go to the loo, they don't look at their phone at all, they just do all of that for 1 minute. That is 20 hours solid. And that's before you even get to the point of deliberating or thinking about which ones you actually want to put through. And that is a lot of time. So I guess the point I'm trying to get across here is that your entry really just needs to make it easy to see why you are great. Obviously, you are all great and you've all done some really amazing stuff. But the point is you just need to make it easy for someone who knows nothing about you and nothing about what you've done to see that and to see those things that I guess makes you different from other people. So if you take one thing, I guess, from this session is I would write that on a post-it note and put that down whilst you're writing your award entry and just have that guide everything that you put together. Just think, if I were to show this to someone that knows absolutely nothing about me, would they, one, realize why I should be the winner in this category, what I've done that's different, what I've done that's unique, but also, do they get to it? Like, do I get to it really super quickly? Am I like hitting them in the face with it? Am I making sure that they know that they see that immediately? My partner and I, when we look at job applications at Journal Resources, we have a bit of a rule which we tell people called the rule of 2/3. What I mean by that is we'll typically advise people to cover up the bottom 2/3 of your application or your awards entry in this case, and assess whether in that top third there is already enough for someone to be interested and want to read the rest. Now, as judges and shortlisters at the SPA, we do make a really big effort to make sure that we do read through everything and we read it through in its entirety. That's why it takes us so long. But generally, like, you're onto a good thing if you can cover up the bottom 2/3 and you've immediately already got the top stuff and you're really making it clear and easy for people to see why you're great. So that would be my overriding. That would be my overriding thing, I guess, to start off with. And just, I guess, wrap up a couple of things there that I said. So yeah, always apply again. If there's anyone here who is thinking, I've applied for these awards before, I've not got anywhere, and my publication never seems to get anywhere, I would urge you, please do try again. Take what we're going to talk about in this session, like work it in, make it a slight improvement on the year before, and please do keep going. Like, it's a clean slate every year. You're the only one keeping count. No one who's looking at these entries is going to go, oh, well, they only did this last year, well, that's what it looked like last year. So please always try again. And this goes for anything, so even outside of the SPA awards. But yeah, please do. And the other thing I guess I would advise you to do as part of this process is to always keep your applications. So if you've applied in previous years, go and dig them out. If your publication has applied in previous years, go and dig them out, because actually I think one of the things that we often struggle with awards applications as entrants is it's very rare to get feedback, and the reason for that is exactly what I said a second ago, in that you've got 1,200 entries to go through. We do try our best at the SBA to provide generic feedback to run sessions like this, but like, it's impossible for the most part for a team of volunteers to do that. But if you're actually able to keep your applications or to look at the applications that people have done previously, actually you're able to give yourself a lot of feedback, especially with the benefit of a little bit of time. So do keep your applications. I just have a big Google Doc, Google Drive folder, sorry, and in it I just save everything I've ever sent off, and I note down if I got rejected, shortlisted, or won, if I got any kind of feedback, and I will kind of before I start again, I'll open that up, I'll have the criteria next to me, and I'll go through and be like, okay, well, this only got that far. What was wrong with it? What might I kind of change or do differently? If you haven't got any of that, now is a great time to start. And you can also kind of help your future, make it as part of your handover process, help your future editors down the line by keeping those things so that everyone can kind of keep building on that process. So to give you an example of this, I'll send these slides out. We will also put the video up as well. But here's an example to give you, I guess, a real life example of what I did with this. This is not for the SBA Awards, I can't, which I sadly can no longer enter. But this was my entry for the DBase Awards in 2022, I want to say. Yeah, 2022. And I'd applied for it twice before I won. So the first time I wasn't successful, the second time I was. And I wasn't able to get anyone else to give me any feedback on it. But what I did was critique myself. So if you see on the left, I basically, these are the two answers to exactly the same questions. If you look through on the left, I'd basically just been like, this award came with some money. And I was basically like, hey, just give me your money. I know exactly what to do with it. Like, I've got this all worked out. Like, just hand on over the cash. I looked back at that a year later. I looked at the criteria for the awards and I was like, oh, actually, like, they don't want someone who knows what they're doing. I don't really know what I'm doing. No one knows what they're doing. What they're actually looking for is someone for this particular award was someone who actually had wanted to learn and wanted to be part of a community where they could learn. So I completely changed it, and that was the one that was successful. So I would, obviously this isn't the award that you guys are applying for, but I would advise you to think about this kind of process if you do have that available to you. Just getting up some old entries, thinking about how you might change them or tweak them 12 months on, and doing that with a real close look to the awards criteria as well. Now, not all of us will have this to hand. If you don't, there are a couple of the other things I would really advise you looking at. So we have our awards guide, which has been published on the SBA website. That is just on the Spank 24 tab. I'd very much recommend taking a look through that. There is specific guidance for each category. There's also some tips. And that is basically what I would be using to make sure that I am hitting all of the bullet points that people are asking for in that supporting statement. So I would literally like write a bullet pointed list of like the 4 things that they're looking for in that particular award. I'd have them like on a notebook or again on a post-it and make sure I tick off that I've covered all of those things. And again, there's also some more general tips there. So I really would recommend having a real good look through that. It sounds obvious, but broadly, that is what we're looking for. And that is also what we give to judges every year when we tell them what to look for. The other thing I'd recommend doing is having a bit of a nose around at what past winners work looked like. We have all of the past, I think going back to like 2013 or something wild, we have all of the past winners on the SBA website. So you can kind of go and have a look through for whichever and whatever kind of category it is that you're looking to apply for. Have a look and see if there are any trends or if there are things that you think could be done differently from those past winners' work, which are all publicly accessible. Equally, you can also have a look at some past winners' entries. There is, I will find the link for it. There is a slightly old piece, which is on the SPA website, which includes, I think it's, it may even be 2017 now, but it includes a link to person that won and also what they wrote in their supporting statement or their entry, so that you can actually see how those two work together. Our training officer Ella is also currently putting together a 2024 version, which will be sent out this week as well. So if you signed up to our mailing list, you can expect that in your inbox soon, so that again you can kind of see what past winners have wrote, and again maybe just think about how that compares to what you've written in the past or what you might think about writing and how you can maybe take some inspiration from that. Also, obviously this workshop, you're here, so I don't really need to tell you all that. I've mentioned this already, and again this sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but do try and do all of this stuff early. If I look at the stats every year, there used to be a point when like well, I mean it still does, but like our email inbox will crash at like 11:58 p.m. and we've all been there, and I am quite frequently still there when I'm applying for awards, but it's very rarely the awards that I win. So if you can find the time to not necessarily get them in early, but maybe just do that thinking early on, to do that thinking of looking through the awards criteria, to maybe like just let it percolate in your head and go, you know, okay, they're looking for this, how can I tell the best story of that? You'll put yourself in a much stronger position to write a good entry later on, because you'll automatically be thinking of it. So really do, if you can, try and do it as early as you can. And maybe this one is slightly controversial, but my other my other push to you to get this done as early as you can is that you can also use it to inform what you write in the first place, and to inform what you're like putting together for these awards. So again, maybe slightly controversial, and maybe some of my colleagues at the SPA wouldn't agree, but if you are looking at that criteria really early, and this can even be for next year as well, and you know that we prefer certain things in terms of what a good piece looks like, maybe that informs what you actually want to go out there and write. And yeah, maybe controversial, but I do believe that the criteria that we set for the SPA awards around what we are basically what we genuinely believe makes really great student journalism, and making it the best it possibly can be for that audience. So if you use that as a bit of a guide for the content that you're potentially putting together, I don't think there's any problem with that. We're seeing what we look for and trying to reflect that in, what you're doing, because I think, yeah, we're really trying to push people with these awards to write the best things that they possibly can. That picture on the left is an example of basically when I did exactly that. A couple of years ago, I applied for some funding from the Solutions Journalism Network, and a certain stage in the process, they were like, we want everyone to have written some solutions journalism, but no worries if not. And I was like, well, I've never actually written some, so I'm going to go write it right now for the outlet that I work for and publish it with their criteria in mind, and was then successful in that because I'd kind of written that content around their awards. And actually this piece did really well with our audience, because their criteria was trying to get the best out of us. So yeah, just something to bear in mind, especially if you're starting early. So we've kind of talked a little bit about maybe just some overarching statements, and why you should get it in early, why you should make it as clear as possible, how you can kind of give yourself feedback and some of those resources. But what should actually go into that entry? That's what I'm going to talk about next. And what kind of things, I guess, we're looking for. So the first thing I would say, and we've probably kind of covered this already, but really hammering home how your piece hits that criteria. So going to the awards criteria for that specific category, pulling out those 4 points, asking yourself, how do I fit this? Make a checklist of it and tick it off to make sure that you've covered that in the supporting statement. It's really that simple. So make sure that that supporting statement or that page or whatever else it is that we've asked you to submit directly relates to the criteria. As I said before, that is because that's literally what we give to judges and say, this award is looking for X, Y, Z. So just make it easy for people. If you know they've got several hundred of these to look through, there are some categories that we run that have like 200-300 people applying. So you just want to make it easy for them to see why this is something that hits that criteria. The other thing I would say, which is maybe one of the things that gets missed, I think, quite often, is using that personal statement or using that entry that kind of goes around the piece of work that you've done to tell me things that I won't know about your story or outlook from looking at it. So like, I don't know, like, was your interviewee really hard to track down? Did you do some FOIs to find that data yourself? Like, was the university press office like an absolute nightmare? Like, was it the most read story all year? Like, why did you make the decision to cover that story in the first place? What were the internal conversations you had? Was it kind of picking up on a bit of a vibe in the community? Whatever it is, make sure you're using that kind of that space to tell us things that we wouldn't know. I think one of the most frustrating things for me sometimes when I'm going through things and judging them is you see this, I don't know, great piece of work and you have no real insight into what went on behind it. So really use that part of the application to tell us all of those things we won't know. Everyone will read the story, everyone will take a look at the outlet, like if it's best website, everyone's going to go and have a poke around. But just make sure that we kind of understand why you did things and all of that extra effort that just won't be seen. And I would say that's probably one of the biggest things that gets missed. And quite often it will be missed out in favor of quite, broad statements that maybe tell us something really obvious. And obviously a bit of context is important. So saying, we are the student paper for the University of here and we have a team of X, Y, Z, a little bit of that is great. But if you spend all of your time talking about that, we're not going to really get to the really interesting stuff, which is why you made those decisions and what the actual hard work behind the scenes were. The last one on this slide is a little bit related. So talking about impact. So this is kind of, I guess, the flip side. You did all of that work and what happened as a result? And this is something that typically tends to set a story or a publication apart for me. So it doesn't have to be anything big, but just having that thought about what happened as a result of what you did is something that's really important to that supporting statement. So maybe it's that I don't know, a policy got put to the SU. Were more people inspired to come forward and talk about it? What did some rules change? Like, have more people started to read you? Was it the top story that that you have had all week or all month or whatever? It can be anything, and it doesn't have to be anything big, but just really thinking about, I guess, what happened as a result, I think is really important. It can be qualitative, it can be quantitative, it could even just be that your interviewee was actually just like sent you a message afterwards and was like, you did a really good job at covering my story, and that was really important to me because it was a really kind of vulnerable chat. So whatever it is, tell us about an impact, tell us about something that happened. Yeah, it doesn't have to be anything necessarily big, but just having that thinking, I think, also often typically gets missed. And tell us why that's important as well. I think the other thing I would add is that sometimes I think people get really worried there, where particularly if you're from a smaller publication and maybe you have or a smaller campus, for example, we're not necessarily thinking about impact in terms of the biggest number. It's actually like something that's relative to your community, relative to your own growth, and actually what something that's impactful and why that's important. So yeah, don't think about it in terms of the biggest number, just think about what has this story done and why is that actually important to me, to my community, or maybe actually it's just something that you learn or that your publication learned that you're going to change and you're going to do something differently in the way that you report or the way you put things together in future. So hopefully I've explained that in a way that kind of makes sense. I feel like I've rambled a bit there, but it's been a very long day. So what other things are we looking for? What makes you unique? Again, I think this is something I would very much recommend, just like, I don't know, like writing on a post-it note and being like, and I've said this like 3 times, but add that as your third one on the post-it note. What makes you different? Like that same thing I mentioned a minute ago is of course important, but like what is different about your story or your publication? The amount of best publication entries you see, and they all kind of start the same. They're all like, hey, we're the student publication for this town and we have this many writers and this many sections, and that's all super great because you're doing so much super great stuff. But everyone kind of has that, right? Everyone is a student, everyone who's entering these awards is a student publication for somewhere. They have a bit of a team, they have different sections. So actually just think about the things that make you stand out. Like, what is the most impressive part of what you've done? What's the standout thing? That's the thing that should go at the top. And that's kind of what I meant when I was talking about earlier about that like rule of 2/3 as well. So putting the most impressive stuff to the top. So, is it that you have a vertical or a section for your publication that nowhere else does? Have you done something particularly innovative in the last year? Have you written some guidelines about AI and you think you're the first student newspaper to do so? Have you been part of like some kind of new launch on social media? Have you written a story that hasn't been covered anywhere else? All of that stuff is the stuff that you want to put at the top rather than the stuff that everyone has. And that's not to say that isn't important. And of course, you do want to give a context and to talk about, I guess, your scope. But what you really want to hit people with are the things that make you different. The other thing I think I see like quite a lot is like quite jargony or essay style writing. That's not to say that you shouldn't use the best word that fits, but you just got to remember again that you just want to make this easy for the person who's looking through 200 of these. So you don't want to waste your words or make it really verbose. Just get straight to the point. Treat it like a news story, that supporting statement. Write it as you would where yeah, you're putting together a feature or a news story where you're going to the most important part first. Don't waste words. You only have a limited time, a limited amount of words in which to get your, you know, your to get your story across. So don't like waste any of that by just kind of doing a long introduction or waffling on. And equally, like, I don't want to have to Google words. So just my general rule is like, write like a news story, get to the point. And if you wouldn't say a word in ordinary conversation, like to your mates or to your parents, then that's probably not the best word to be using in your supporting statement. Similarly with design, I think that quite often, like good design is good. So if you are a bit handy within design or you want to make the fonts and logos look great, that's all good. I would think what I would say is you absolutely don't have to do that. So if you're here and you're like, oh God, I don't actually have, you know, I don't know how to use any of those tools like InDesign or Canva. I don't have a background in that. That's not actually what we're looking for. What we're looking for in terms of design is that it should be clear. So if you have a great idea for how you can stylize that to your publication, absolutely go for it. Like that's a great thing to do. But if not, don't worry. The main thing that we are looking for is that it is just clear and easy to read. So your design should reflect that. Sometimes what goes wrong when people put together a bit of an interesting design is actually that can just make it a bit cluttered. So always just make sure to apply that test with however you've laid that out, that it is just easy to read. And then finally on this slide, I think yeah, just use the correct amount of words as the maximum word count. Use that as a guide. So if we've asked for 500 words, we're probably looking for about 500 words. Quite often we'll see people who, again, probably because they've rushed and it's towards the end and are just chucking anything in, where they're like, here's my 10 words, it's a supporting statement. Or just maybe are like, oh gosh, I'm not quite sure what's expected here. Do I need that much? I would use that maximum word count as a guide. That's generally how much detail that we're expecting. Don't go over. We, in the interest of fairness, won't read it. But it's equally as important not to go wildly under, as and I think it's quite likely that you won't have enough detail in it, and there won't be enough for us to be able to make that decision. So yeah, in terms of what makes a good entry, make sure you're hitting the criteria, have those bullet points, tell us what we won't know just from reading the story or just from looking at your publication. So tell us what went into it, talk about the impact or the changes that happened afterwards as a result. Focus on what makes you unique and make that the kind of top thing. Steer clear from any jargon or essay style writing, and equally any confusing designs or ones that make it unclear, and make sure that you're using the word counts as a guide. If you hit all of those, I think generally you're really like along the right path. And that's all the stuff that we're looking for. Of course, as well as the entry, there is also the story. So I've included a little on this. I'm sure some of you already have in your mind ideas of pieces that you want to put together and that you want to put in. But if you haven't, I'm just going to run through just a couple of points of some of the things that sometimes that we look for, or some of the views that typically have been expressed over the years that might help you make decisions about what stands you the best chance of getting onto that shortlist. Because for most of our categories, you can only enter a limited number. So if you're looking to enter best news story, I think you can only enter 2, for example. So you want to make sure that you pick the one that is going to give you the best chance. So I'm going to run through a couple of those things again, just to give you a little bit of insight into how you can pick the best piece. Cool. So I think the first one that I would pick, that I would pick out as a big one that we tend to see that people don't necessarily follow is making sure that it's relevant to your student audience. You know, for the most part, and I know there are some specialist publications within the SBA who do target something different, but for the most part, like, people who come to student publications are students, and they're students of your community, and are coming to you for something quite specific. They're looking for things that are, relevant to their interests and also to that specific student community of whichever campus or university you're at. And so what we're really looking for is stories that your readers would go to you for, not to anywhere else. So, we're not necessarily looking for stories where you're, I don't know, say trying to be like a national newspaper, or where you're trying to write something exactly in the style of Stylist or the non-league paper or whatever it is. We're looking for stuff where you're putting together the news, the features, entertainment, reviews, whatever it is, but with a lens that is specifically for the students on your campus. So I'm looking for stories that reflect that, if that makes sense. So just not a carbon copy of what you might be able to see elsewhere. So we just want it to kind of have a sense that you've tailored this to your exact audience, and that you understand what the students on your campus specifically want, and what they care about. Like, the next one, or that one at the bottom, I think is a little bit similar, maybe about expertise, in terms of writing about something that you can talk confidently about. But I guess the point is that, like, I don't know, while how to phrase this, I guess, like, while there may be a really strong student interest in something that, say, Rishi Sunak has done, or Liz Trusted, or whatever that latest catastrophe or national talk is of the day, you don't want to just rewrite that as a national story. Like, to us, we'd really be looking for something you'd found yourself, something you'd done the legwork, or maybe just found a local angle on and move the story on with your own work. So really think about how you've made these stories relevant to your audience, rather than it just being a rewrite of something that's in the national interest, or something that's a national story where you haven't found the local angle or the specific lens that you're reporting it on, if that makes sense. And especially for comment, like, ask yourself why people would come to you for this particular type of reporting. So do you have a particular lived experience? Do you, again, is it something about students? Is it something about that local area? Just ask yourself if this is something that you can kind of speak confidently about. The other thing I would point out, as a big one, and again, this one might sound obvious, but we're really just looking for original reporting as well. So, have you actually gone out and spoken to some people? Have you gone and seen the gig to review, or the theatre show in the kind of local area? Have you taken a story that affects people in your area and moved it on in some way? Typically, and again, there's exceptions to all of these things, but typically we're not just looking for a press release that's been rewritten, or something that's happened at a local or regional level where you've just, like, rewritten it. Of course, breaking news, we've got a new breaking news category this year, and if that's something that you've done, absolutely, that counts as original reporting. But what we're not looking for is pieces where that has already been reported elsewhere and it's just been rewritten. Hopefully all of that makes sense. A couple of other things we typically tend to see. People speaking on the record where possible. Of course, there will always be situations where, if you're speaking to a particularly vulnerable interviewee, where you are speaking to someone who needs anonymity because of what's happened to them, absolutely, of course. In that case, you may have an anonymous interviewee, but generally, like, we would expect people to be named in a story, especially if it's just kind of like some vox pops on campus, or a very straight news story. And sometimes we see pieces come through where it will be like, oh, and this person didn't want to give their name, but it doesn't really tell us a reason why that should be the case. If there is, absolutely go for it, and make sure you've kind of typically got that little asterisk that says didn't want to give their name because of X. And on that note of interviewees, do try in your pieces to let the interviewees do the talking. Often they're the experts, not us. They're the people that we're like going to. So we're not necessarily looking for pieces where people have rewritten what the interviewee has said and paraphrase that. We actually probably want those interviewees to do the talking. The other thing I'd perhaps ask yourself if a listicle or Q&A is the right format. Again, there have been some notable exceptions to this throughout the years. So I don't know if you've managed to get someone super high profile and that was the only thing that you were able to do. But I think for a listicle or a Q&A format, like it's quite hard to show off your writing in these formats because all you get are the question and the answer, or you get just stuff in blocks without that flow. And actually for our features and longer form writing categories at the SPA, we do take into account your writing style. So if you're maybe if you're choosing between a couple of features that you've done, maybe a question to bear in mind, like are the listicle and the Q&A ones perhaps your strongest, because that might not necessarily show your writing style. And then the final one, the final one that I've put here, which is maybe just something you can tweak, is typically tend to see a lot of people who will maybe just start a feature with a definition, again, a little bit SAE. So think about what your most attention grabbing parts of that story is, or what your most just attention grabbing stories are more broadly. Like what are the ones that you really have that you can really be like, see yourself in the coffee shop or down the pub or wherever being like, have you heard about this? And you have the top line. So just think about the most attention grabbing pieces that you've done. And those are, I guess, the kind of stories that typically make a good story and are the things that we're looking out for. So just some things to think about when you're trying to pick what are those two pieces that you actually want to put in and think showcase your work in the best possible way. Now, before we go on to questions in a couple of minutes, so we will come on to questions very shortly, so do feel free to pop them in the chat if there's anything in particular you want to ask. I thought it also might be useful for me to tell you my method of how I actually judge things, because I think it's most that if you understand, I guess, the process, then again, you can kind of understand what people are looking for. So my method of judging, which I think is pretty similar to most of the shortlisters at the SPA, is that you're paired with someone else. You get a Google Drive link with 200 entries in it, and you go, oh my God, what have I done? Why have I agreed to do this for another year? And then I would typically do what I would call like a first sweep or a first pass, which is where I'm literally going to kind of scan read, and I will look through the whole thing, but I will basically quickly read through every single one to see if there's something that catches my eye in there, to see if there's something that's like a real no-no, and if there is something that's a no, or if there's nothing in it that kind of catches their eye, then that's probably going to get like left into the bin pile. So that's kind of what I mean by how you really need to make it really obvious. So that when someone is scanning through 200 entries, you need to make it really obvious for them to go, oh, there's something interesting there. So I'll scan through the whole lot. I'll go through all 200, quickly read them, and then I'm instantly already starting to sort them into, I'll have like a yes, no, and a maybe pile. And that sounds really harsh, but like it's kind of what you've got to do if you've got like 200 entries to get through. So generally, you'll probably get rid of about half of those straight away. And your job is just to avoid being put into that going straight in the bin pile, just by being obvious about why it's great, how it hits the criteria. And it really isn't hard to avoid being in that pile if you followed all of those things that I've mentioned above. So if you've made it clear and easy for me to see why it's good, it's obviously an original piece of work, it's tailored to your audience, you've done some original journalism, you've told me about the impact it's made, that's probably going to go into the yes/maybe pile. If it's not, it's probably going to go into like the no side. And then once I've done that and I've got rid of like 50% of them, that's when me and the people I'm paired with will actually sit down and actually start to have a really nuanced discussion about all the ones that are left and why you might like one or not the other, and the kind of real intricate merits of them. So your job is basically, and once you've got past that, not in the bin, I guess not in the bin stage, but again, I know it sounds really harsh. you're already like 90% of the way there. So just have that really time poor judge in mind and make it really easy for people to see why your work is like fitting all of the criteria. And then the final thing, before I open to the questions, if anyone has any, because we've got about 15 minutes. This sounds so obvious, but please do get someone to read it. The obvious benefit to getting it done early is that you can have someone to proofread it. Like whenever I'm personally applying to something I'm quite passionate about, I always get 2 people to proofread it. I will get one person who knows the project or the story well, who can point out things I might have forgotten, and can kind of like just give it a general kind of read, knowing that background. And then the other thing I'll do is I'll try and get someone to read it who knows absolutely nothing about it and what I'm doing. In my case, normally that's my parents, because I don't think they have any idea what I do still. But that is just as useful, and I think it's something that we don't do very often, because remember, like, a judge who's going to read this actually probably doesn't know anything about you or anything about your publication. So if you're able to get someone to proofread it who doesn't know anything about it, they will be able to pick out some things where they go, well, this is really great, but you've not explained X, or there seems to be a bit of a hole here. And they'll be able to flag things which you think are maybe a given or are really obvious, that you need to include and that you need to tweak. So yeah, my recommendation, get it done early. I think we did some stats one year. Well, this was for Journey Resources rather than the SBA, but about like 10% of our job applications where people have applied to us will typically spell either my name wrong or the company name wrong. Again, it happens, like no big deal. But the earlier you get, no big deal for me, but the earlier you get that, the less likely, the earlier you get the stuff done, the less likely you are to kind of end up in a situation where that's going to be ending up in your final draft. And just making everything as polished as you possibly can just makes it look like a better application. So yeah, that's broadly everything I had to say. I hope that was somewhat useful. I appreciate I've just talked to you for like 45 minutes. I wanted to end by just saying, yes, you can do it. Like, I have applied for so many awards many times and I felt like I'm never going to get anywhere. But actually, also my experience of judging them has made me realize that if you really can just follow the criteria and some of those tips, and you're all way ahead by actually being here and having listened to me ramble on for 45 minutes, it's actually a lot easier than you think to get like to rise above like 90% of stuff if you just take all of that stuff into consideration. So yeah, I hope that was useful. We have 15 minutes. I don't know if anyone did in fact have any questions. I think there's the ability to raise hands. I don't know. I'm happy to take questions on anything if there is anything else that you would like to know or ask. If not, we can all just go and enjoy our evenings. But I just want to make sure everyone has everything answered that they, I guess, wanted to know, and that they came here hoping that they would know. I'll put my email in the chat as well. I obviously can't give feedback on specific parts of applications because I am part of the shortlisting team. But if there are, I guess, any things that you would like to ask when you get out of this that you feel would be useful that we can maybe clarify, then very happy to do so. And equally, do feel free to put questions in the chat if you'd rather, if you don't want to say them out loud. Okay, there's a few in the chat. How old are the winners generally? Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't think we've ever done an analysis on that. I think I think the only thing I guess I would say, I mean, this is anecdotal, so I'm not 100% sure. I would say that typically winners are probably in their like second or third year, but that's only because that's probably because of when they've been aware of the SPA. We do have specific awards for people who are in their first year of working with their student paper. So that's not something that we take into account, I guess, at all, really. So when we're looking at that application, there isn't anything about age. So I don't know which way you're viewing this on. I don't know whether you're like worried about being at the top or the bottom end of that. Like, we've had everyone on our shortlists, from like literally just started, and it's the first piece they've written to. We had a guy who was shortlisted last year for outstanding commitment, who was doing a PhD and had been part of his like paper for like 10 years. So like, no one's looking at age. Next question. If you're a member of two publications who are both members of the SPA, can you submit articles from both publications? Yes, you absolutely can. But there is just a personal limit for you in terms of how many you can submit in total. So, you couldn't, if you were part of 5 publications, you couldn't submit 10 pieces for best news story. You'll still have to pick for you, which are your 2 best that you want to kind of put in. But they can be a split from different publications. So yeah, you don't have to pick one and stick with it. I absolutely will send the link to some of the past winners' entries. I may have to send that to you after the session finishes, because we've recently redone our website, so I need to go and find it. But I will find it and I will kind of send it to everyone that's here. And as I said, Ella, our training officer, is currently putting together a more up-to-date version of that this week. So if you make sure that you sign up to our mailing list, so if you have a look, go to spajournalism.com, make sure you sign up to our newsletter on there. You'll also make sure that you get that email later this week, which will have some more up-to-date examples. So yeah. Cool. Okay, well, unless anyone has anything else in particular they want to ask, I will leave it there. We will send you out we'll send you out the slides, we'll send you out links to past winners examples. Feel free, genuinely, please do email me. As I say, I can't give individual feedback, but if there are any questions that you felt were unanswered or that you would like a little bit more guidance on, please let me know and we can kind of work that into like some more available support. And yeah, do enter. I really can't wait to read a load of your stuff. So yeah, have a lovely evening, everyone. I hope it was useful. And yeah, I look forward to seeing all of your entries. Thank you, everyone.